I make this video in fear, shaking at the thought that the Tekken team might actually listen to these game-breaking recommendations from a worrying amount of people to bring the step-in system in Virtua Fighter to Tekken, as if such a change in fundamental inner workings of a fighting game would not result in utter and complete failure. This fear which consumes my soul was exacerbated when I saw Arya from That Blasted Salami making these comments on his stream.
You know what I really want for Tekken 8? These are my two biggest wishes for Tekken 8. I want a sidestep system from Virtua Fighter that's like analog. Like if you step a move that is steppable, the game reads it as, you did the right thing here, and you get a whoosh noise. No, it's binary in Virtua Fighter. You either stepped correctly or you didn't. In Tekken, there's like a huge spectrum of variants. But in Virtua Fighter, it's like 0 or 1. It's binary. You either stepped it correct, you either stepped it or didn't. Oh, whatever, it's analog, it's just, you know what I mean, right?
This is not some random schmuck presenting his silly opinions. This is an important figure of the Tekken community blatantly asking for Tekken to not be Tekken, but to be Virtua Fighter. If you are a member of the Virtua Fighter Revival Discord, you might have already discussed this with me. If that is the case, you know my stance. Keep Tekken as Tekken and keep Virtua Fighter as Virtua Fighter. Let me begin by stating that not only do I actually play Virtua Fighter, but I thoroughly enjoy it. It's a remarkably fun series based around quick mind games, simple execution and transparent mechanics with little to no inconsistencies. However, for as much as I enjoy Virtua Fighter, I will be the first one to tear it to pieces, pointing out the wholly aggressive nature of the game with next to no defensive play. Virtua Fighter for me is like Third Strike and Mortal Kombat 10, a tremendously fun game and series, but a completely broken, silly and almost party game experience where mind games turn to excessive guessing more often than not. Let me repeat this, I love Third Strike, I love Mortal Kombat 10 and I love Virtua Fighter, but I will never compete in such games and I will never even imply games with Septile monsters Summoner Quan Chi, Reverie Makoto and Third of a Life bar Midgard Break Akira should be copied or emulated. There's a lot to unpack in regards to the petition to bring binary stepping back to Tekken. Yes, I said back, as Tekken 3 and the original Tekken Tag Tournament made use of a far more binary stepping system. The catch of the system was the crucial difference between Virtua Fighter and Tekken, a difference which Tekken 3 and Tekken Tag Tournament had not yet fully developed. Cancelling a step resulted in punishment. Look at this footage in which Armor King and Brian get hit by a standing one followed by an electric. You can see a very easy step is done, something which is completely impossible to do in Tekken 7. Now let me first state that Tekken 7 is not a 3D game, it's a glorified 2D game which killed the outstanding movement from Tekken Tag 2, a game many people consider to have too strong movement even though it was not binary. Now, why not go back to the system in Tekken Tag Tournament? Because it does not allow to microstep block. Look at Armor King and Brian getting hit when trying to microstep block in Tekken Tag Tournament. You cannot see the command history, but I am inputting sidestep left into block immediately, yet I am getting hit every time. What happens in Tekken Tag Tournament 2 though? Well, depending on character, of course, because character size truly impacts lateral movement, unlike in Virtua Fighter where Taka Arashi can step just like every other character, you could have the following situation. An option selected microstep into block. This completely changes how the game plays and fundamentally turns Tekken into a defensive game where offense is a commitment, not defense. The only requirement for such a technique to be performed is an average size character and pretty good execution from the player. This is why in real Tekken games, characters with weak lateral movement were, the vast majority of the time, unbearably weak. To balance weak evasion through movement, Tekken characters would need to have access to stupidly strong toolsets which negate the need to even use the third dimension, like Jinpachi in Tekken Tag 2, widely regarded as one of the worst characters from a design point of view in Tekken history due to his stupidly strong moveset, which turned the character into an autoplay monster requiring very little from the player. You will never see lateral movement from Jinpachi, yet people hate the character. On the other hand, Ruoga, easily on the weak end of the spectrum in Tag 2, could not put up a fight against almost anybody due to the very fact that he could only sidewalk a very select few moves in a game in which movement was the most important tool of a character. Of course, forget Jinpachi for a moment and remember the Mishimas, who were top tier not because they have stronger tools than in Tekken 7, quite the contrary, it was because the movement of Tag 2 allowed the Mishimas to force whiffs into massively damaging whiff punishments. Let's look at the most crucial aspect which undermines the proposition to bring Virtua Fighter's stepping into Tekken: balance, and then let's take a look at Soul Calibur post Soul Calibur 2 to see what bringing the Virtua Fighter stepping system into that game meant. How do we balance tools in traditional fighting games? By adding or removing specific properties, by modifying startup, life and recovery, and by forcing execution requirements. In the case of lateral movement, Virtua Fighter only uses one option, the evade, which we call stepping in Tekken. There's no sidewalking in Virtua Fighter. The player cannot block during an evade, and being hit during said evade triggers a counter hit. Soul Calibur 2 players already know where I'm going with this. To add, cancelling an evade in Virtua Fighter required a forward dash or a generic crouch dash. In Virtua Fighter, a generic crouch dash is performed by inputting down forward, down forward. Automatically, good Tekken players will realize that, by design, Virtua Fighter step cancelling cannot possibly be as fast as Tekken, therefore movement itself is far more limited. One doesn't need to be an expert in either Virtua Fighter or Tekken to be able to simply see that movement is far more prevalent in Tekken than in Virtua Fighter. But let's take a look at the properties of the evasion in Virtua Fighter. Regardless of character size, regardless of disadvantage within the limits of safety, an evade performed during the startup of a linear move will turn into a successful evade. During this moment, the defendant becomes invulnerable to the move which was just evaded. In other words, Virtua Fighter characters can, by design, evade at any disadvantage, which doesn't guarantee a punishment while forcing no execution on the player. The evade is easy to perform and has a binary result. It will either win or lose. There's no chance of losing due to a badly timed sidestep like in Tekken. Such a property is very transparent to its strength. You'd have to be blind not to realize the implications of being able to step electrics and hell sweeps with no execution requirement with Marduk while at -9. This is why Virtua Fighter chose to make all movement committal. Not only is the cancelling of the evade far more difficult to do than in Tekken, but, as said before, the player is counter-hit if the evade is unsuccessful. Say goodbye to step blocking. It is inhumanly difficult to do due to the amount of inputs required from the player. In other words, stepping in Virtua Fighter is always a commitment. While option selecting an evade cancel is a possibility in Virtua Fighter, not only is the command obtuse, but the evade itself loses its evasion. You heard that right, if you cancel an evade in Virtua Fighter, you lose all evasion. While in Tekken a cancel step loses its evasion, Tekken has micro steps, which make quick step cancelling actually usable. Look at this footage again. Armor King is quickly cancelling this step to punish an electric after being hit by Kazuya's down forward 1. Now, in Virtua Fighter, a successful evade cannot be cancelled. I'll repeat, a successful evade cannot be cancelled. In other words, punishing whiffs from an evade with a launch is almost non-existent in Virtua Fighter. Look at this footage. Lao-chan blocks Akira's standing jab and evades the second standing jab into nothing. You cannot punish this sequence with an evade. Quite a different story in Tekken, where characters can step into launch, the difficulty of such thing depending of course on the launch itself. On a final note regarding evade properties. By design, evades lose to grabs, or in Tekken terms, grabs are homing in Virtua Fighter, just like in Soul Calibur. While players can make use of option-selected throw breaks, there is a three-way guess of those very throw breaks: forward, neutral, or back break. And if the player cancels evades with crouch dashes, the command is, to put it simply, a hazard to the hands of the player. I cannot put it into words just how impossibly difficult it is for a human being to not only evade cancel with a forward dash to cancel into block, but to do that while also option selecting a throw break, which is a guess. And I say cancelling into forward dash because you cannot block during backdash in Virtua Fighter, my dear Tekken family. Just imagine not being able to block during backdash and realize how much Tekken would actually stop being Tekken. Imagine then for a second a character like Marduk, who is already a top tier character, a monster of mix-ups and a hellish grappler. Imagine this character being able to step electrics and hell sweeps like it's nothing, while being able to grab you with its outstanding throws which beat your lateral movement. This would be a competitive nightmare. Hell, Marduk has already been a competitive nightmare since Tekken 5, and I would even dare to say that since Tekken 4. With this in mind, we can clearly see that evading in Virtua Fighter is a means to steal a turn and force pressure onto the opponent, while in Tekken lateral movement is a tool to primarily punish opponents and not force pressure. I invite you to watch high-level gameplay from Virtua Fighter 3, 4 and 5 and contrast it to high-level footage of Tekken 5 and Tekken Tag 2. You'll be shocked at the amount of whiffs being launched in Tekken from evasion, even though the sidesteps and sidewalks have no binary result. You will also see, quite immediately, that Virtua Fighter is a far more aggressive game than Tekken. Now, let's take a look at the fighting game series, which killed itself by choosing to copy Virtua Fighter without much regard to the rebalancing of its changes before going back to a hypothetical Virtua Fighter evade system in Tekken. Soul Calibur 2 allowed players to block during movement. This was eventually called step blocking. The fancy name simply refers to the ability to instantly block after moving, be it a backdash or a step. Leaving aside 2G box, this resulted in a fairly safe metagame with strong movement being at the core of the experience. There was actually a point in calling Soul Calibur the movement fighting game, because it truly was played around the movement capabilities of the players with no execution requirement. With the arrival of Soul Calibur 3, not only did the series die and never manage to recover, but step blocking was removed. No longer could the player block instantly after moving, because there was a recovery period. This recovery period, by Soul Calibur 6, is around 16 frames. This turns movement into a commitment, and it makes this statement that Soul Calibur is the movement fighting game a hilarious, ironic lie, especially considering that, since Soul Calibur 5, stepping triggers a counter-hit state, much like in Virtua Fighter. But indeed, Soul Calibur is the worst example possible, and one the Virtua Fighter Revival Discord quite often agrees with. The series was destroyed by implementing Virtua Fighter elements with little to no regard to balance when importing those elements. To add a very important note, step blocking or any easy access ability which allows the player to cancel movement into blocking fundamentally makes the game easier to play. One of the biggest frustrations of new players is being hit while moving. Being hit while moving in Tekken, even in Tekken 7, is almost 100% avoidable, because any movement can be cancelled into block close to instantly by simply holding back. Soul Calibur does not allow instant blocking, as there's a 16 frame period in which the player not only cannot block, but will be counter-hit. In Virtua Fighter, players cannot easily block. They must dash forward to cancel the evade and then block. To go even further, in Final Showdown, the player must cancel a backdash into an evade and then the evade into a forward dash to be able to block. My dear Tekken family, just imagine having to cancel backdash into step into forward dash just to be able to block while moving back. Enough of those particularities. let's present some hypothetical situations for Tekken 8 under the Virtua Fighter evade system. Before continuing though, let me remind everyone that I love Tekken, I love Virtua Fighter, and I, regrettably, love Soul Calibur. The latter entry simply managed to kill itself far more gruesomely than the previous two. What do people like Arya mean when they say they want the Virtua Fighter evade system in Tekken? This is a legitimate question. No, Arya, I do not understand what you mean, because you claim to want Tekken to have 100% successful steps against linear moves, but you do not actually explain how you would balance people doing nothing but stepping. Do you mean you want Tekken's cancelling system, but with Virtua Fighter's evasion and steps? Then we can somewhat agree, Arya, because such a system was effectively what we had in Tekken 5 and Tekken Tag 2. For sure, those games did not have binary stepping, and execution was still a requirement for steps and walks, but said execution was a balancing act. Brian had weak stepping, yet on the high-level players, the character was perfectly fit for competition. I have never heard complaints from people claiming Virtua Fighter's evades are too strong, all the while I have heard on many occasions how, quote-unquote, Tekken 5 and Tag 2 steps are too strong. Especially from new players who feel such viable movement systems are insurmountable. Let's go back to Marduk. How do we balance Marduk within a system which allows for quick and easy access blocking during all movement, like in Tekken, while having binary results and linear moves, like Virtua Fighter? Quite simply, I do not believe we can balance such a monster of a character. He would be unbeatable. He would have evasion, damage, punishment, and range. Within the systems of Tekken 5 and Tag 2, Marduk was a remarkably strong character because his command list took his massive size and lacking movement into consideration. Seriously, stop for a second and think about Tekken 7 Marduk with outstanding movement. Just think about it, for a second. Marduk being able to step everything into launch from the other side of the screen, because, of course, successful evades in Virtua Fighter trigger regardless of range, meaning that you could possibly option select a down forward one during evades. This hypothetical change not only buffs big body characters to the stratosphere, but it also strucks any execution requirement put onto the player in heavily disadvantageous situations. Tell me, Tekken family, should it be as easy to step an electric when at -1 and when at -9? Please, answer with honesty. This change would also result in the death of any impressive stepping. Seeing a step against an electric or a hell sweep always feels great, precisely due to the execution required, which changes depending on character and disadvantage. Turning this step into a binary affair results in boring stepping. There's no flair. The step worked because, of course it would work, it was by design. However, even though lateral movement would see its execution requirement removed, this hypothetical Tekken game with easily performed step blocking, backdash blocking, and binary lateral movement is, fundamentally, what we had in Tekken 5 and Tekken Tag 2. Let me remind everyone, again, that nobody complains about the movement in those games, because, unlike in Tekken 7, evasion through movement is actually usable without the need of it being binary. Let's keep going with the hypothesis and let's take the crucial game-breaking one, which would turn Tekken into a completely different game called, you might know this one, Virtua Fighter. Let's say we balance stepping being 100% successful by removing easy access to step blocking and forcing the player into cancelling into forward dash or backdash. Then welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a completely different game which no longer plays like Tekken. And this is only the first step. We still have not added punishment to movement like in Soul Calibur or in Virtua Fighter with counter-hit states. This hypothetical Tekken game suddenly went from being a rather difficult game in terms of moving around, like in Tekken 5 and in Tag 2, and into being impossibly difficult to play, destroying accessibility. Just ask a new player to not only Korean backdash, but now they also have to backdash cancel after stepping. The game's newcomers would be dead on arrival. Hell, most of the current Tekken scene would be in for a painful awakening, as they see that their lacking backdash cancel got only worse because now they have to not only worry about it, but they also have to worry about cancelling steps with double the amount of inputs as the previous entry. With these changes, we have fundamentally changed the value of lateral movement in Tekken. It goes from being a freeform, safe tool which gave Tekken its crucial characteristic that made it different from quite literally every other fighting game out there, into just another cheap Virtua Fighter copy where movement is a heavily rigid commitment. Finally, let's look at one of the ways to not only change Tekken completely, but to kill it entirely, like Soul Calibur. Let's hypothetically add punishments to movement. Now players are not required to have any execution on the 100% easy evades like in Virtua Fighter, but they cannot block for the entirety of the evade. Let's not even add counter hit states. This is a sure way to completely kill Tekken and turn it into a mashing fest of homing moves into homing moves into homing moves. Suddenly the game's primary focus on defense is completely turned on its head. Last is doing nothing but back one into back one into back one into back one, but this time it's actually hitting. There's no longer safety in Tekken. One of the foundations upon which the game is built is removed. With this change we have turned Tekken into constant and forced rock paper scissors where commitment is the name of the game. I will finish for the time being, as more examples are currently not needed. My closing statement is the one I always use in the Virtua Fighter Revival Discord. Let Tekken be Tekken and let Virtua Fighter be Virtua Fighter. I love both games, but one is actually unique and truly different from the rest of the fighting game sphere. No other game allows for defensive play as much as Tekken. Let it remain that way. Think of the implications of importing a system like in Virtua Fighter, where evades work the way they do, not on a vacuum, but in relation to the rest of the game's mechanics. Throws being complete three-way guesses with fully homing capabilities, evades being too slow to allow launch punishment for the majority of the time, and the lack of a divide between stepping and walking. To close, I will say what I would like for Tekken 8 as quickly as I can. A full return to Tekken 5 or Tekken Tag 2 movement. The addition of punishment as a move property which enhances an attack's capabilities when used, of course, as punishment. The addition and correction of special highs, special mids and special lows to follow the properties of those in Soul Calibur and Virtua Fighter. A serious step back in general character power to stop the crippling power creep issues caused by Tekken 7. A general weakening of lows and a return to Tekken Tag 2's generic throw breaks and throw break windows. There's more stuff I would love to see in Tekken 8, but those are the most important things for me. I believe in the Tekken team regardless of this video, and even if Tekken 7 was, from day one, a massive disappointment. I tried my best to get past the serious issues with the game, but I can only take such weak lateral and backwards movement for so long before I need to stop. I have not played Tekken 7 seriously ever since early Season 2, and that was simply to get footage for a Brian guide I was making. That very Brian guide, instead of rekindling my love for Tekken, only managed to open my eyes even more to the damaging changes brought by Tekken 7. The Tekken team gave us the best fighting games. I truly believe they had the best intentions for Tekken 7, but it misfired. Tekken 3, Tekken Tag Tournament, Tekken 5, Tekken 6, Tekken Tag 2 were all marvelous games. Tekken 4, while not a proper Tekken game, was also an incredibly fun game and painfully underrated. Tekken 7, however, is a painfully weak entry. Period. In such a masterful series of fighting games. It took people several years to properly wake up to this entry's shortcomings, and the conversation regarding the next Tekken game must begin. I will be in the comments replying as quickly as I can. Take care, everyone.